Hello all. If you're a regular viewer to the channel, you've no doubt heard me speak about word spells in the past. These are tricks used by the denizens of liberal modernity, sourcing their power from the core of the liberal ideology and used on their unsuspecting opponents to incapacitate them and put them on the back foot, even to make them morally suspect. Ists and isms and phobes are the big ones here: racist, sexist, Islamophobe, and on it goes. Now, there may be an inkling of truth to some of these accusations sometimes, but broadly speaking, the user of a word spell does so to make themselves appear the caring, rational, non-violent one, while surreptitiously making opposing political views, while they're not nominally illegal, seem virtually illicit, meaning they're effectively symbolically outlawed. Now, I imagine you all know what I'm speaking to with word spells after the woke era. I think many of us came across word spells originally and thought, well, fair enough, no one wants to be nasty to anybody else. However, over the years, it became clear this was something of a tactic of many a leftist and many a liberal. It wasn't just that you could be neutral and listen to them, you actively had to agree with their word spells. And if you didn't, you could lose your job, your reputation, and so on. Now, the most prominent word spell we're seeing at the moment is the far right. And while there's always some crossover with reality in a word spell, we can see it's moved into the magic realm because it's used across the board with regards to conversations of multiculturalism and immigration. So, context in place, on your screen is Humza Yousaf, ex-First Minister of Scotland, and I'm sure you will remember him as being quite an obnoxious guy, so I'm not going to subject you to his ranting here. However, I am going to draw out 3 things he said above this video. He states, 3 things the far right don't want you to know. Britain is indebted to migrants. This country needs migration or faces economic catastrophe in the future. Immigrants work hard. We shouldn't fear newcomers coming here. We should fear a future without them. Talk about being fricking tone deaf. I mean, this is exactly the line that the Western world has had for decades now. They've had the whole of the state structure, the whole of the media apparatus to push exactly this message to Westerners. You're pathetic, you don't work hard, you need immigrants, they've saved your country, now shut up and get on board with the program. But we must remember, when they say these things, they're not saying anything literal, because we've all heard this before 100 times, whether you're on the far right, the far left, or the centre. The point is, this is designed as a word spell to emotionally manipulate you. Even the language at the top, the far right don't want you to know. This implies that the quote far right actually have some power, but they don't have any power at all. I mean, who's been in government for the past 30 years? It's been the Liberals. Who's been in charge of education? The Liberals. Who's been in charge of Hollywood? The Liberals. And they've all been pushing this message. And this brings us to the core point. The quote far right are saying something that is actually true, and that is that Humza, as well as the liberal state apparatus, is actually lying. We don't want infinity migration, and it's not going to create a better tomorrow. In fact, it's making everything much worse and much more dangerous. But Humza, being a cog in the machine of mass liberal propaganda, knows that he has to use a word spell to push the people back into line, and that word spell is, of course, far right. It's the point of this video to break that word spell. So let's start from the top. What exactly does far right mean? It's one of those words with 4 or 5 different meanings in modernity, like racist. And the reason it's like that is so the liberal system can use it in different ways at different times and hope that you won't notice. Using the example of racist, we can see how such terms are used to manipulate people politically. In common parlance, we all assume racist to mean hatred of someone for having a different skin tone, which is of course a bizarre thing to engage in. I'm sure some people do feel that way, but to my experience, it's exceedingly rare to meet someone who thinks that way and just hates another person for having a different colour skin. So broadly speaking, the public en masse will agree that racism in this definition is morally wrong and unnecessarily cruel. Yet over the past few decades, we've seen a clever sleight of hand by the liberal ideologues. They'll use the public's understanding of racism, as mentioned above, and then surreptitiously segue in all manner of further definitions that are expected to be defended with the same moral outrage as the original definition. Blank slatism is one example of one they segue in, but most profoundly is the neo-Marxist power definition of racism that was once kept to the fringes of the cultural studies school at SOAS Uni, but has now been infused in the very centre of the culture. Worse still, Well-meaning people will now defend that very definition, believing they're defending the first definition. Or even worse, midwits will go just deep enough to figure out this new definition, but instead of digging deeper and overcoming the manipulation totally, they'll take on the identity of the clued-up anti-racist for reasons of moral and intellectual narcissism. And this is how quite radical ideas have been infused into the mainstream and taken over. We can see this same dynamic at play with the term far right. I mean, what do you think of when you hear the term far right? It immediately conjures up images of violent, crazy, insane, hateful people. There's also the implication here of the liberal mythological conceptions of what World War II was about. If you're labelled far right, the implication is you're fighting against your ancestors, against what Britain itself fought for to create its modern iteration. I remember at 20 years old at university, some intellectuals saying that we were in a pre-World War II 1933 situation, and I've heard that every single year since from some smarty pants lefty academic without fail. Now, given this happens time and again, it's clear this isn't actually happening, but the reason they do it is because they want to replicate the moral, political and social landscape that they understand themselves to be in by virtue of Western liberal modernity, obviously painting themselves as the good guys. So again, like the term racist, while there might be some legitimacy in there somewhere, properly understood, they actually use the term to reframe present situations through the prism of liberal modernity that they can dominate in and understand. But most importantly, it allows the liberal power structure to demonize anything that thinks outside of it. That means anything that's even mildly right-wing becomes, quote, far right and symbolically illicit. This is why even gentle, sweet conservative types like Roger Scruton were labelled as far right during his career. So this is definition one of the far right, the word spell, which implies it's illicit and leading to immediate violence. But what is the far right actually? I mean, is in the actual political position. And yeah, I accept there are a few crazies out there, a few wild people, but what about the people who actually, are philosophers in that space? Now, it's a massive subject, so I'm oversimplifying to an extent, but broadly speaking, far-right thinkers seem to focus on hierarchy over equality. They believe hierarchy to be natural, both in nature and in spirit. Obviously, there's a strong focus on nationalism over international bodies. They're anti-liberal, they tend to focus on tradition, and they tend to push towards more of a collective identity over individualism. Now, you can disagree with these things, but the broader point is, are they actually immoral? Now, you could say they're immoral if they're utilised as precursors to start unjustly attacking someone through a Christian moral frame. Now, neutrally speaking, such beliefs are amoral. Morality enters the frame depending on how such beliefs are used. They're really just one end of the political spectrum, and we should remember the political spectrum of left and right is simply modernity's effort to understand human beings and their interactions with each other and society. But as I've said many times on the channel, I believe in the modern world the left-right spectrum is completely obsolete. These ideologies of leftism or centrism or whatever only really offer fragments of reality, and we're getting trapped in ideological possession, thereby not being able to see the broader truth. And this is why I personally prefer a traditionalist, more metaphysical understanding of political reality, which doesn't see the world so much through left and right, but more light and shadow, masculine and feminine. An oversimplified way to understand this for the layman is to think of something like the yin and yang. You have the two forces, but ultimately they're one whole properly understood. Sometimes one side is more dominant, another time another side is more dominant, but it depends upon what the structure needs at a given time, rather than ideological fixedness. Now, through this understanding, every energy has a dark side and a light side. So you could say something like the masculine or the right-wing side in contemporary political language can be tyrannical, it can be overbearing and oppressive, but it can also create order. And its light side, it can be heroic, it can protect the clan and create the boundaries of tomorrow for a gentler time. The feminine side, or the left side in contemporary political language, can also have a light side that focuses on compassion, care, creativity, beautiful expressions of that nature, but it also has a dark side which we're so bad at spotting in modernity, largely because it's gynocratic. But anyway, the dark side takes the form of the devouring mother, which can lead us to be chaotic, naive, delusional, and even lead us into destruction due to that naivety. Ergo, through the traditionalist understanding, it's less about doing what your limited ideology demands and more about doing what truth and wisdom demands at a given time in history. As you might imagine, this is why the tradition is so important with its philosophical and religious dimensions. This is where the great elders come from who can guide us forward like the leading lights. But we've decided all of that's nonsense in the modern world, and that means that we're left with the intellectual, the bureaucrat, who only utilise the modern political frame. And via this model, the power structure of the age, which is liberalism, funnily enough, puts itself smack bang in the centre of the political frame, meaning, oh, you're the most rational, you're the most sensible, the most moderate. This creates the Tony Blairs and the Louis Theroux. And this brings us to the odd situation we're in now, where anything outside of the liberal mainstream borders on the, quote, extreme, which in turn attracts the extreme personalities and becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Of course, though, we're not supposed to recognise the absurdities of this model when you think most of our ancestors, maybe 99% of the heroes of Britain, would have been, quote, far right through the modern spectrum. I mean, the kings, the queens, Shakespeare, Milton, they all would have been extremely religiously conservative by the standards of today, as well as believing in the natural order of hierarchy. Even Churchill, who is going something of a reanalysis in the post-liberal boomer age, but he is seen as this figure who fought against the extremism of old. But in reality, he believed in hierarchy and made lots of racist statements himself. He wasn't some leftist multi-culti type. But even the mythology around Churchill too has been swallowed by the dominant liberal ideology of the age and rehashed to mean that our post-World War II Britain is basically the fight for the multicultural future. And when we put all this together, the word spell, as well as the idea that ideas of hierarchy and belonging are by their nature far right, and far right is by its nature evil in the post-World War II mythology, it means the European identity itself becomes wrong through the liberal frame. Here's ex-Labour advisor to Tony Blair, John McTiernan, explaining why it's evil for English people to raise the England flag in England.
Well, when I see it used at the moment across the country, it's being used to other people. It's being used to racialise political discourse, and I'm deeply uncomfortable with that, where people are trying to divide the country using the George's Cross.
Now again, it's also lovely through the liberal frame, but think about what this guy is saying. I mean, the whole point of a flag is that it defines a people and a nation, a tradition throughout time. Is he actively saying that a flag has to include everybody so it doesn't other anyone? Then a flag would have no meaning at all.
The stated aim, though, of a lot of these groups is patriotism. It's national pride. It's not bigotry.
It's clearly not national pride. It's clearly a form of othering, saying that this flag represents something that other people don't belong to. It's done, it disturbs people. I can understand why it disturbs people.
Again, through the liberal frame, also compassionate, but from a broader analysis, it doesn't make any sense. He states, it's not about national pride, it's about othering other people. But how can you have national pride without othering anyone? And this is the whole reason they're raising the flag in the first place. It's because people like John McTiernan are trying to destroy their identity. They're trying to tell them that they're uniform, standardised, homogenous. There's no difference between an Englishman and some guy who just arrived from Timbuktu. So while they're trying to take the moral high ground, they're actually creating a pressure cooker by telling the English people that they're not allowed an exclusive English identity, which is what the English people are. In a just world, we should have had a natural correction of this many years ago, and then we wouldn't be dealing with the insanity that's about to unfurl now. Every nation in the world does this. India recently kicked out a load of migrants. Pakistan kicked out, 4 million Afghanis? The reality is that life is hard, and sometimes people and nations have to make harsh decisions in order to maintain the precarious cultural and ethnic balance of their nations. That's not evil, that's standard national behaviour. If we'd taken hard but correct action 20 or 30 years ago, we'd be closer to the England of old. Yeah, it would still have its problems, but we wouldn't be in an existential crisis. But taking such action would demand us stepping into the strong masculine pole of the yin and yang to re-implement order, not forever, but momentarily to create peace down the line. However, through the cultural frame, that would be seen as toxic masculinity, and through the political frame, it would be seen as quote-unquote far right. That means that all we can do is maintain on with the mass immigration and the endless liberal propaganda about diversity as we supposedly move our way towards Star Trek while listening to John Lennon's Imagine. The point I'm making is, were we a bit wiser, we could have dealt with this a long time ago and not have to deal with the chaos that's going to ensue. It would have been hard, but it would have been necessary. However, now we're just going to have to wait for things to explode, not just in the UK, but all around the Western world. Then the key thing for the wise elders of the tradition is to ensure, as things start to go back the other way, that we don't fall back into the dualism of modernity. What I mean is, any future chaos will be challenging, but it will be an opportunity for us to break free of the dualistic political ideologies that define modernity. In the traditional understanding, it's the journey of the soul to overcome dualism in our individual lives, but it's also true on the political and collective level. If we can overcome the purgatory we find ourselves in modernism, I believe we can reinvigorate Western culture for a new tomorrow. You may say that I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one, eh? Anyway, if you're interested in the personal and spiritual transformation stuff, do check out the sister channel, The Sacred Way. You can join me on the Substack for exclusive content and to join in the monthly Q&As and so on. Do let me know your thoughts about all this down below, and do consider subscribing to the channel if you're new. Enjoy the rest of your day.